Okay, it's Monday. We're raring to go from the world headquarters of RT America and our nation's capital. Hello again, everybody. I'm Rick Sanchez. Let me first take you through a global wipe fest. Wipe is the TV term, by the way, for one video effectively pushing out the other video. Here we go. Wipe one. Haiti. 42 people have been killed protesting government corruption there. Let's go to wipe two. Hong Kong. More violent protests over the weekend seem to directly tie the demonstrators to the United States, so says Beijing. And wipe three, Iraq. Protesters are now trying to infiltrate the infamous green zone where they are being met with actual live gunfire. We're going to break down the rage in all three of those places for you, but we're going to begin with what could become the biggest problem that's facing America today. And it's barely being talked about, but it really is. All signs now point to a recession or worse being around the corner. And how do we know that? The Fed's actions, that's how. It is literally cutting interest rates, what, 3 times now? Even hinting of another round of QE, quantitative easing. You don't do stuff like that unless you're really worried, right? Economists agree that they're worried. And if they're not worried, they should be worried, right? So what will likely trigger the recession? Experts say it's going to be this trade war with China. No doubt about it. But wait, didn't China bail us out the last time there was a recession? Huh? The last time there was, what was it? The meltdown it was called, right? Last time there was a recession in the United States. Who bailed us out? Most people don't know. China. Yeah, the answer is yes, China. China rescued the United States economy during the meltdown by buying our treasury bonds, essentially buying our debt, right? So it wouldn't be there anymore and we can get more, which is what they did. Now, think about that. Think about what China did last time as you hear China expert Suyab Gupta talk about the U.S. verbally lambasting China last week.
Because once the recession comes, you will have to go back to China to ask them to have fiscal stimulus for the global economy. And China did it in a big way in 2007, 2008, but also learned some negative lessons, and it's not going to do it a second time.
Did you hear what he just said there? He said, quote, he's not going to do it a second time. He even did this little thing with his finger, right? He's not going to do it a second time. China's not going to do it a second time around. If that's true, then what, right? Think about it. If we can't bring down interest rates because they're already so darn low, if we can't borrow more because the debt and the deficit are already kind of maxed out, and if China comes in and says, look, you guys started a trade war with us, therefore we're not going to bail you out this time around, then what? We're getting ahead of this story because sometimes you got to look ahead, especially when the consequences can be so dire. This is the news with Rick Sanchez, where we believe it's time to do news again. Our list of the questions we think you're going to be asking tomorrow. Why did China buy our debt, and why might they not ever want to do it again? Will a Boeing exec flying on his own plane convince you, okay, it must be safe? And does President Trump have the right to, quote, keep Syria's oil, or take? Same thing, really, right? But we kick off our A block today with something that we should all be concerned about, a coming recession, which seems more and more apparent with each passing day. Economists say the only question is when and how severe is it going to be. Now, let's take the second part of this first, how severe, right? The answer to that question may have to do with the tools that are at our disposal to get us out of said recession. One of those tools is China. Following the economic meltdown of 2008, China paid trillions and trillions of dollars to buy U.S. securities, essentially keeping the United States economy during a tough time afloat. Suyab Gupta is a China expert. He's with the Institute for China-American Studies. Fascinating conversation we had last week. You left me thinking about this whole China situation having to do with the fact that they may have bailed us out in 2008. And you're saying, or at least postulating, if we go back to that well, it may be dry. Define.
It will be dry this time around. You know, in 2009, China was part of a huge fiscal stimulus, which of course benefited its own economy.
$3.5 trillion, I think?
It was a large, exactly, it was a large sum because the US put out $700 billion. Remember the Obama stimulus, and that was kind of peanuts in comparison.
Yeah.
But the Chinese also realized that that huge stimulus they put out also kind of unbalanced their own economy and exacerbated their already old growth model, which was based on excess investment. They needed and need to transition to a more consumption and high productivity-based growth model. And that's why over the last couple of years, particularly the last 2 years, even as the Chinese economy is doing poorly, they have not provided stimulus to their own economy.
So what you're saying is that in an effort to help us, they kind of hurt themselves somewhat.
To some extent,
they may not want to do it again.
They will not want to do it again because they're not even doing it to themselves at a time when they could do with some help on the stimulus front.
Everybody needs a rich uncle, right? And everybody's always thought we were the world's rich uncle. And our president makes it sound like we really are. We're not. China is. They're our rich uncle, aren't they?
Yes, China is America's rich uncle, and China is happy to play the role of America's rich uncle to have an intertwined economy which provides a ballast to their larger bilateral relationships.
So let's go through the equation of what happens if there is a global recession vis-a-vis a very severe recession in the United States. Some people saying it's going to be worse than a recession. So we have already lowered interest rates, right? We have pretty much gone into our deficits and our debt by printing money. We did that last time. And if we've already used those two tools, and now we turn to China, and China says, sorry, we got nothing for you, what's left, Saurabh?
There isn't much left. You know, China is one of the few countries which still has fiscal space to put out this sort of stimulus to reflate the global economy if things come to that, to such a pass. But the Chinese realize, I mean, this is not something automatically they will do, and especially if they're at the end of a lot of cursing from the American side, what is in their interest to do so?
Yeah, they have been abused of late. I think Mr. Pompeo's comments last week seemed somewhat bombastic. You and I have had conversations about this. But so let's, again, go through this equation, right? The United States is in a recession. They try and get themselves out by printing more money, but there's not a lot of room there because we've already done that so many times. We try to bring down interest rates, but there's not a lot of room there because we've already brought it down to almost zero. We're going to turn to China, but China doesn't have money. My gosh, this could be a pretty serious situation. I guess what I need to know from you is, what would be the situation for the average person watching this newscast in America? How would it hit Main Street?
Let me frame it this way. Each of the previous recessions has had a very significant impact on U.S. domestic manufacturing. We are going to see job losses out there which will not come back to U.S. manufacturing. So in important political pockets, we are going to see severe job losses and movement of production capacity out of this country. That is going to throw up a lot of foul political rhetoric, which will further exacerbate the political narrative out here and give further spur to protectionist forces, populist forces, and all sorts of, I would say...
That's what gets people like Trump elected.
That's what gets people like Trump elected. And you're going to see next time perhaps a Trump, just a more slick-talking person like Trump, but perhaps more dangerous than that. So we should be ready that that sort of a situation could happen at some point down the line.
I get it, yeah. So the situation is really bad in the country. People are desperate, and they turn to anybody who comes along with answers, even if it's fake or false answers. Here's the question. If there is this recession, who is better equipped to be able to get out of it sooner? I imagine the answer, again, is going to be China?
Oh, absolutely. It's going to be China because China is already going through a downturn at this point of time as we speak, and is not reflating and stimulating. It's trying to get beyond its downturn by making productivity-based reforms. And so when that next global recession comes, or when it really strikes America, China will have already passed its cyclical downturn and will be making that investments for the future in strategic industries, 5G, advanced manufacturing, etc., where the U.S. would want to make those investments but will not have the money to.
So China's more poised or better poised to be able to handle the onslaught of a global recession.
Sure,
perhaps
absolutely.
more than just about any other country,
Yes,
and that's what they're
absolutely.
working toward.
Yes, that's
a fascinating conversation to look ahead, but I think, you know what? We should be doing this. If not, it's going to catch us by the short hairs.
At this point of time, it's essential to be asking these questions.
Saurabh Gupta, thank you as usual. Good stuff.
You're welcome.
Once again, we are obliged tonight to report that protests have heated up around the world. And let's take you through it. Haiti, 42 people were killed over the weekend as Haitians continue to take to the streets to protest what they call a corrupt president. And they add that he is a U.S. puppet. The U.S. counters the claim. Now let's go to Iraq. The protesters are breaching the green zone, the infamous green zone, the area established by the U.S. military as a safe zone. Remember that regular Iraqis are not supposed to enter? The protests are rooted in long-standing grievances over poor governance, official corruption, and a lack of economic opportunity that has festered, by the way, since the U.S. invasion of 2003. Oh, my God, look at those videos. Wow. Now to Hong Kong. Scores of people there have been injured, one in critical condition, and at least 12 police officers, I should say, had to be treated for injuries as the protest turned riotous once again. Over the weekend, Beijing continues to accuse the U.S. of being behind the protest, while the U.S., the problem has more to do with Beijing's policies. But the big international story on this day may have more to do with Syria. Large countries have always found ways to co-op or, hey, let's face it, simply steal the natural resources of smaller countries, right? The Dutch did it, the British did it, the Spanish did it, the Japanese did it, and others have done it historically. And at least throughout the last century, it has been more the domain of our country. We've done it, the U.S. has shown a penchant for resource depletion, let's call it that. Usually it's done under the guise of security or pretending to help a country by giving them some needed loans. But now this is different. See, President Trump seems to be defying that conventional way of taking resources from other countries by simply announcing for all the world to hear that, quote, we're just going to keep the oil. Keep the oil. That's right, the oil in Syria, he says, the president, we're just going to keep it. Let's begin our coverage tonight with two people. We have former Pentagon official Michael Maloof, who's going to be taking through the analysis of this, or taking us through this analysis. But we're going to begin with News' Rick Sanchez, special correspondent Michelle Greenstein, to kind of set the table on this. What did he mean? What's going on with this story?
Sure. So just like you almost mentioned, 2 weeks after Trump ordered 1,000 troops to be withdrawn from northeastern Syria, it seems like he actually changed his tune. He's saying with the announcement that the U.S. soldiers would actually be staying in Syria to, quote unquote, secure the oil fields. So it's funny you mentioned security because we're still seeing these claims of security, but it's not about the people. Now it's to secure the oil fields. He says that he intends to make a deal with ExxonMobil or another company to gain this oil, which may seem like a trivial comment on its face, but then you have to consider that Syria is actually a sovereign foreign nation. So let's take a listen to how he made that announcement.
We are leaving soldiers to secure the oil. Now, we may have to fight for the oil. That's okay. Maybe somebody else wants the oil, in which case they have a hell of a fight. But there's massive amounts of oil, and we're securing it for a couple of reasons. Number one, it stops ISIS, because ISIS got tremendous wealth from that oil. We have taken it. It's secured.
It's amazing to hear a U.S. president say that the oil under the soil of a sovereign country simply belongs to us.
It's amazing, and what may be even more amazing is that then we saw the corporate press just parroting these talking points, and we saw them herald this decision as, hey, the U.S. is going to be staying in Syria, again, to be protecting the oil fields. That's how it got reported. And Mark Esper, the defense secretary, even confirmed that these troops will be remaining. He says that, again, we're going to be retaining control of all the oil fields in northeast Syria. Let's take a listen.
Will remain in the towns that are located near the oil fields. The purpose of those forces, working with the SDF, is to deny access to those oil fields by ISIS and others.
So it's interesting because ISIS and others would seem to include the Syrian government, who under international law, that's actually their oil fields, right? And the Russian Foreign Ministry says that the U.S. is already smuggling crude oil worth $30 million every single month from the occupied Syrian oil fields. And when they announced that, they said, hey, why is the U.S. repeatedly claiming to uphold these democratic values and the rule of international law at the same time that they're pumping oil? Because this is, Syria's natural resources. But let's take a look at the Syrian reaction, because this is actually possibly the most interesting part. President Bashar al-Assad, he said that he thinks that President Trump is actually the best U.S. president so far. Here's exactly what he said. He said he's the best American president, not because his policies are good, but because he is the most transparent president. What could be better than a transparent foe?
That's an interesting comment. I was just thinking about that as we bring in our colleague and our expert, Mike Malou, former Pentagon official. There is something almost more benign about a president, unlike other presidents of the United States, who've basically done the same thing, but not just blurted it out the way Mr. Trump seems to be saying it, right?
Right. He's been very blatant about it. And I think that what Assad said, of course, was said with a high degree of sarcasm.
Right.
But the reality is that this is more important than just the U.S. taking over oil fields. This is setting international precedent, which will allow other countries, absent the U.S., to go in and just take, because of that precedence under international law, to take over whatever they want to in other countries, like Sudan taking over the oil fields in South Sudan. What's going to stop them? They can point to this as a justification because the U.S. has set that precedent. Under international law, precedence and possession is 9/10 of the law. And this is what this
But,
is
it's funny because what you're talking about is process, right?
Yep.
And what I'm saying is, I've seen all of us have seen the United States do this. The Dutch do this. The British have done this. The Spanish used to do this. Countries do this all the time, but they do it under the guise of, we're helping you with loans, or we have to secure your country. But this guy's just saying, look, to hell with all those excuses. We're just going to take it. We're the U.S. We can do it. We're the big dog.
This is basically appealing to the neocons. And because we can do it, we have the power. Who's going to kick us out? Nobody right now is going to do it. That's why the power is so important, and that's why people like Assad, people like the Russia and others should be clamoring before the United Nations Security Council about this because of this kind of a precedent. It's a terrible precedent, and the U.S. is in a country where it was never invited, taking over possession of a resource which does not belong to them. It's theft. And this is unacceptable in today's world.
That's a strong word, theft.
Now, the U.S. and its allies are currently occupying at least 30% of Syrian land currently, right? Yep. And the Washington Post reports that that's where 90% of oil production in Syria took place before the war. So can you talk a little bit about how crucial regaining these oil and gas fields are for the Syrian government when it comes to, its reconstruction efforts, to rebuilding its social programs?
Yeah, well, the oil revenues from the oil was going to be used for reconstruction. The United States has cut off all reconstruction funds on its own and has sanctioned other countries that want to contribute to reconstruction in Syria. So in effect, what the United States is saying is that they're for regime change. Also, they're also for partitioning. They are for partitioning Syria. This is what it's coming down to. So that by possession like this, basically, and in effect, the United States is doing it. Joe Biden once talked about this as a policy to basically partition Syria.
It seems to me that for Mr. Trump, everything is politics, right? I think you're onto something here when you say this is great for the neocons. He thinks he'll get more votes by sounding tough without really taking into account the repercussions of this on a global stage. But I thought one of the most things in the soundbite that Michelle just played for us, I thought one of the things that was most interesting was when he said, if somebody doesn't like it and they want to fight us for it, bring it on. Is he really telling Russia, is he really telling everybody in that that part of the world, we want to fight you, we're ready to go to war with you? Is that what he said?
That's what it sounds like. And at the end of the day, what would we be going to war for? You just mentioned that this is great for the neocons. Another entity that comes to mind is Israel. This would also be great for Israel. So I want your expertise on what would partitioning Syria do for Israel?
Is he looking? Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great question she raises. Is he looking for that fight?
Well, the Israelis back the Kurds. And if the Israelis could do it, they would help the Kurds. This is laying a foundation, basically, for separating the Kurds and everybody else from the rest of Syria, basically. And Turkey isn't going to be going in. Now, there's going to be, what I project that might happen is you're going to be seeing increasingly attacks on the U.S. position in that isolated area. That is a vast
So
area.
then what are we going to do? Put the troops back in to fight again after they all left?
I think what might happen, just like what happened before when Turkey said, hey, we're coming in, you also pull them out. I think that could happen.
Pull our troops out.
Pull our troops out. Pull those,
completely.
Pull
the 1,000 or whatever that's left there?
Yeah, pull them out.
But Trump just said no. If somebody tries to take the oil, we're going to fight you. What are we going to fight him with, camels?
But he's also being contradictory. He doesn't want to have another war. He doesn't want us in Syria. So he's got to make up his mind.
So which is it?
We don't have a policy.
Are you the tough guy or the guy who's running?
Well, this is the problem. We don't have a policy.
It's interesting. He did run on a campaign of non-interventionism.
That's correct.
Looks like that all.
And he has been thus far a non-interventionist as a president.
There's one other.
As a commander-in-chief.
There's one other point.
I mean, compared to other presidents, which war has he started?
Maybe not started, but he's escalated and continued them, and he has the power to stop that.
I'm being told we got to end the conversation. You got 10 seconds to put a punctuation on it.
Recently, there was a number of Coptic Christians from that northeast section. They came in. That might be another reason why he's occupying to appeal to his evangelical base.
All right, we're throwing the Coptic Christians equation in there, too.
Why not?
Thank you.
Why not?
Appreciate it. Appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
Pleasure.
Our last report on the Boeing plane that no one wants to fly had flight attendants for American Airlines saying they're not willing to work on the 737 MAX. If pilots say they're not going to be convinced, and if flight attendants say that they're not convinced, and if passengers say they're not convinced about safety, then who's willing to fly this plane? The answer, management. That's right. Some senior airline company officials say they will fly the plane themselves to calm fears. Publicity stunt or important strategic move? Here's RT correspondent John Huddy.
On behalf of myself and the Boeing Company, we are sorry, deeply and truly sorry.
That was Boeing CEO Dennis Muilenburg last week apologizing to the families of Boeing 737 MAX 8 crash victims. It was a fairly emotional moment during the hearing when Muilenburg spoke directly to the family members seated behind him and the other top Boeing officials, the family members carrying large photos of their dead loved ones. Muilenburg took a beating by lawmakers who questioned his honesty, integrity, and why he still has a job. Senator John Tester of Montana said whatever fixes Boeing makes on the 737 MAX 8 isn't enough for him to step aboard.
I would walk before I was to get on a 737 MAX. I would walk. There's no way. And the question becomes, when issues like this happen, it costs your company huge. And so you shouldn't be cutting corners, and I see corners being cut, and this committee is going to have to do something to stop that from happening.
Boeing has said that it's made significant software changes in the 737 MAX 8 and is issuing new pilot training plans for the jet, among other things. Still, many people have serious concerns about the jet's safety. That's why the airlines are reportedly making plans to conduct their own test flights, along with those by Boeing and the FAA, and are apparently going to use their own senior company officials as the guinea pigs, basically having them step on board before any of members of the public do. But that probably isn't going to work for everyone. Building passenger confidence in the fleet of grounded aircraft is just one of the major obstacles for Boeing in the wake of the MAX 8 disaster debacle. Whether or not travelers want to brave the friendly skies aboard a 737 MAX 8 will not be a question they need to answer, at least not this year anyway. Both United and American have cleared the MAX 8 from their schedules through January, and Southwest doesn't plan to use the jet until at least February of next year. European aviation regulators, meanwhile, are conducting their own test flights, along with those by the FAA. The MAX 8 could be taking off from European airports during the first quarter of 2020, according to the head of the European Union Aviation Safety Agency, meaning that they could be flying possibly by March or April of next year. We'll see about that. For the news with Rick Sanchez, John Huddy.
And we'll stay on top of it for you. The fertility industry is making headlines with a man in Oregon claiming 17 children have been fathered using his collected sperm, and a doctor in Colorado being accused of using his own sperm to inseminate his own patients. RT's Trinity Chavez has more on this development.
A doctor in Oregon has spent the last 30 years believing that he had 5 biological children conceived with his donated sperm, leading lives of their own somewhere far away from him and his family. But little did he know that wouldn't be the case.
In 1994, you donated to a fertility clinic anonymously. Apparently, there was a mix-up at the clinic. What? You are the biological father of 533 children. What?
Similar to the Vince Vaughn movie Delivery Man, a doctor in Oregon says that his sperm was used to conceive at least 17 children. Bryce Cleary said that he agreed to be an anonymous donor to help infertile families and further research, all under the conditions that no more than 5 children would be conceived and that they would be born to mothers outside of the Pacific Northwest. However, many of the 17 offspring were in fact born in Oregon.
What's true is that this was a deception and this was fraud, and I don't know if it continues today. I don't know. As far as I can tell, there really aren't a lot of regulations. There's just fertility clinics do what they want to do.
Now Cleary has filed a $5.25 million lawsuit against the fertility clinic. The lawsuit says that there was a chance that some of his children have attended the same schools, churches, and have even interacted in some of the same circles without even knowing it. One of his children spoke at a press conference.
That it's wrong, and you know that hasn't been anything that I've considered or talked about. This is just before I knew that Dr. Cleary was told something that wasn't done. You know, this was a shock for me and for my siblings to know how many of us in the same area there were in general, and then learning that this was not what the donor intended, you know, adds a whole new layer to that.
Meantime, in Colorado, a fertility doctor is being sued for allegedly using his own sperm in multiple inseminations instead of sperm from anonymous donors. Dr. Paul Brennan Jones surrendered his medical license on Friday after multiple allegations that he engaged in fraud, battery, and medical negligence for over 3 decades. Now, when asked if he had donated his own sperm to father the children, he said he doesn't deny nor admit it. Meantime, Texas this year passed a law barring a fertility doctor from inseminating a patient without her consent. California and Indiana have so-called fertility fraud laws, but Colorado does not. Reporting in New York, Trinity Chavez, RT.
Hey, thanks so much, Trinity. We hope you enjoyed this global conversation. If you like what we do and have some friends looking for a newscast that's not like the other ones, tell them we're here. And we'll see you again in a half hour when it'll be time to do news again.